This is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 21, Tuesday, February 14th, 2012. The orders of the day. This is pursuant to Standing Order 1082, studies standing on guard for thee, ensuring that Canada's immigration system is secure. We have two groups of guests today, two of whom we see all the time. From the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, Mr. Linkletter, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic and Program Policy. Hello again. And Madame Deschênes, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Operations. And we also have from the Canada Border Services Agency, and I don't recall seeing you here before, but welcome to the... You have been here before?
Thank you.
We have Peter Hill, who's the Director General of Post-Border Programs, and Pierre Sabarin, who is the Vice President of Operations Branch. I think it's been explained to you by our clerk that Madame Deschênes, that you would be speaking for up to 10 minutes, and the same for you, Monsieur Sabarin. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to the committee. This is the start of this study, which is basically security. So, Madame Deschênes, you have the floor.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Greetings, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Claudette Deschênes. I'm in the ADM operations. Mr. Linkletter is for the Assistant ADM, Strategic and Program Policy. I wish to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak to some of the challenges we face in ensuring the security of our immigration system, as well as the measures we are taking to address them.
Measures CIC has introduced already to help increase the security and integrity of our immigration system. A key focus of the department in recent years has been to reduce fraud, since this presents our biggest challenge. As you know, Mr. Chair, the Global Case Management System has now been in place at all of our missions as of March 2011 and will be available at all of our in-Canada offices by the end of February 2012. Rather than looking for pieces of information in several outdated systems with limited functionality, one that is 20 years old, with GCMS, we can now view an applicant's information in one location. This has made our processes much more efficient and has greatly improved how CIC shares information with our partners to prevent fraud. For example, GCMS has been instrumental in some of our investigations into citizenship fraud, since it can identify when an address is repeated more than once in applications. As you know, Mr. Chair, the government is currently investigating 6,500 people for misrepresenting their residence in Canada. To date, CIC has begun the process to revoke the citizenship of up to 2,200 citizens who obtained it fraudulently. This is a lot in a short period of time if you consider the fact that the government had only revoked the citizenship of 69 people since 1977. Legislation to strengthen the regulation of third-party intermediaries came into force in June 2011, and this will make it more difficult for crooked consultants to assist applicants in committing such types of fraud. These efforts were also bolstered by an anti-fraud awareness campaign that I'm sure you've all seen. As well, prospective immigrants and citizens need to understand that fraud concerns us all. They must know that they are the first line of defense, and they cannot just rely on the government to protect them. In addition, CIC launched a suite of videos on our website to provide prospective immigrants with information about the dangers and risk of immigration scams, including unscrupulous immigration representatives. Pour ce qui est de l'avenir,
moving forward, CIC intends to bring into force regulatory changes this year that would deter marriage fraud and strengthen CBSA's ability to remove individuals who engage in this type of fraud. While we have bolstered our efforts to reduce fraud in recent years, we remain concerned about the growing prevalence and sophistication in identity fraud and identity theft globally. In the immigration context, identities are most often stolen or concealed in order to help an applicant overcome their inadmissibility, to disguise their criminal past, for example, or to help them gain entry into Canada when they would be denied for other reasons.
Critical that we stay on top of new technologies and the new methods used by fraudsters to manipulate our immigration system. Biometrics is an important step to stay ahead of the game and reduce fraud and identity theft. Beginning in 2013, certain foreign nationals who require a visa to visit, study, or work temporarily in Canada will be required to provide fingerprints and have their photographs taken as part of their application. With the introduction of biometrics, it will therefore become much more difficult to forge, steal, or use someone else's identity to gain access to Canada. Biometrics will also make it easier to prevent known criminals and previous deportees from entering Canada. And it will prevent failed refugee claimants from re-entering Canada by using false identity documents. On the other side of the coin, biometrics will also help us to facilitate legitimate travel. A key challenge we face is in accurately identifying applicants each time they apply to come to Canada. An applicant may have changed their name since their last entry, for example. Linking an individual's biometric data with their biographic data will help us to more quickly identify applicants and ensure that the person coming to Canada is in fact the same person to whom we issued a visa. Building on this, I'd also like to address our role in the Canada-United States Action Plan for Perimeter Security and Economic Competitiveness, a mouthful. Under this plan, the two countries will establish a common approach to record and share the entry and exit information of travelers crossing our shared land borders. While the Canada Border Services Agency will be the Government of Canada lead on establishing the entry and exit system, CIC will develop the legislative and regulatory policies changes in order to introduce the new entry requirements. Currently, many travelers entering Canada at a land border may confirm their identity and status by oral declaration or by presenting documents of inferior reliabilities, ones that can be easily altered. Our new policy will simply require all travelers to present a prescribed document when entering Canada. The current patchwork of entry requirements has led to confusion at the border for travelers and commercial carriers. A more secure border will both facilitate the flow of legitimate migration across North America while enhancing our security. In addition to the new entry requirements, we plan to introduce a common approach with the U.S. for screening travelers before they begin travel and reach our shores. To achieve this, we will require that visa-exempt foreign nationals, except U.S. citizens, apply for an electronic travel authorization before flying to Canada. This means that anyone who wants to travel to Canada would first need to complete an internet-based form to provide us with basic information. CIC would then issue an electronic document to passengers who pass the screening. In the majority of cases, we anticipate that applicants would receive confirmation of their travel authorizations within minutes. The U.S. has already successfully implemented a similar system where over 98% of applicants are automatically approved for travel. And we anticipate the ETA system will be in place no later than 2016 in Canada. Finalement, nous prévoyons partager de l'information.
Finally, we plan to share information with the U.S. in order to help establish and verify the identities of travelers. This will help us to better detect fraud and improve public safety through better detection of persons with criminal histories or who pose other risks to the public. In addition to helping us to address threats to North America, this approach will help us to reduce the costs and resources needed to process inadmissible persons in Canada. That's because by using a perimeter approach to screening, Canada will have the ability to identify and deny entry to inadmissible persons overseas, instead of dealing with them once they have reached a port of entry.
We'll also have better information on travelers to enforce and administer their own immigration laws. For example, we will be able to expedite the departure of persons who have no right to stay. Conversely, information sharing will also help us to facilitate the flow of legitimate travelers by giving immigration officers greater confidence in the identity and immigration history presented by the applicant. I would like to note at this time that rigorous privacy safeguards will be in place to ensure information is shared in a way that is consistent with Canadian laws. In closing, I would like to note that CIC is first and foremost committed to protecting the health, safety, and security of Canada and Canadians while facilitating the travel of legitimate visitors. And we continue to explore ways in which we can better address the security challenges we face in our immigration system. Thank you.
Perfectly timed. Thank you. Monsieur Sabourin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Pierre Sabourin, and I am the Vice President of Operations Branch at the Canada Border Service Agency. I am joined by Peter Hill, Director General for our Post-Border Programs Directorate Programs Branch. As the CBSA has not yet appeared before this particular group of members, I'd like to take a few moments to talk about the agency's mandate and its role and responsibilities in Canada's immigration process. The CBSA was created in 2003, established in the wake of the September 11th events, to bring together elements of Customs, Immigration, and Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The agency's mandate is to provide integrated border services that support national security and safety priorities while facilitating the free flow of legitimate persons and goods. The CBSA has approximately 14,000 employees, including 7,300 uniformed staff across Canada. Our border service officers are designated peace officers, primarily enforcing customs and immigration-related legislation, and particularly the Customs Act and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, as well as over 90 other acts of Parliament. Each year, the agency processes approximately 93 million travelers, including 25 million air passengers. These travelers arrive at our borders as returning residents, visitors, refugees, settlers to this country, and of course, those who should not be admitted. As the committee can appreciate, delivery of service on this scale is an immense undertaking. With respect to the committee's study, the role the agency plays in the security of the immigration system is fundamental. Having assumed the Port of Entry and Inland Enforcement mandate and oversight of the Overseas Liaison Officer Program, formerly held by Citizenship and Immigration in 2003, the CBSA is responsible under IRPA to admit individuals into Canada who meet the requirements under the law and refuse entry of those who do not, prevent people who are inadmissible or improperly documented from traveling to Canada, refer refugee claims made at ports of entry to the Immigration and Refugee Board, detain individuals who pose a security risk or a danger to the public, and remove inadmissible persons who have an enforceable removal order in effect. In carrying out these responsibilities, the CBSA processed approximately 10,000 of the total 25,000 refugee claims made in 2011. We detained almost 9,000 individuals who were deemed dangerous, flight risks, or who were unable to prove their identity. The agency refused entry to 54,000 inadmissible persons at the ports of entry and removed some 15,000 inadmissible persons from Canada, 1,800 of whom were removed on the basis of criminality or other security issues. To meet the challenge of finding the right balance between border enforcement and facilitation in a shifting and dynamic global environment, the CBSA employs a layered approach to the variety of intelligence and enforcement activities it carries out. This approach is focused on risk mitigation and on leveraging resources with key partners such as CIC, the RCMP, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In assessing risk before individuals depart for Canada, the CBSA undertakes intelligence and security screening activities to identify and intercept threats and inadmissible persons at the earliest opportunity. The CBSA maintains a network of liaison officers to support its work abroad. Currently, the agency has 63 liaison officers in 49 key locations across the globe. The CBSA's liaison officers work closely with other government departments, foreign mission representatives, airlines, and host country officials. Some of their activities include interdiction, airline liaison and training, anti-fraud, intelligence gathering, and removals assistance. The liaison officer program is successful from both a risk mitigation and service perspective. On an annual basis, liaison officers interdict over 4,000 improperly documented individuals, while facilitating approximately 2,000 legitimate travelers, the majority of whom are Canadians returning home after extended stays in a foreign country. The CBSA undertakes the security screening of immigration application at CIC's request. Where CIC feels that an application may be of interest or concern based on security indicators, it is referred to the agency for a more detailed review. Once reviewed, the CBSA works with its security and intelligence partners to make a recommendation to CIC, with whom the decision to accept or refuse a case rests. Lorsque des voyageurs se présentent à un bureau d'entrée,
when travelers arrive at a port of entry, the CBSA's border service officers verify their travel documents and determine if all Canadian entry requirements have been met. Should someone be found inadmissible at that time, the appropriate enforcement action will be taken. In cases where individuals make a claim for refugee protection, BSOs will conduct a preliminary interview and make a determination on the eligibility of the claim. Eligible claims are then referred to the Immigration and Refugee Board. For those individuals who are already in Canada who have been determined to be inadmissible, there are at the moment 409 inland enforcement officers who carry out a broad range of activities, investigating, arresting, detaining, and removing individuals. Individuals will often go underground to avoid removal. The CBSA works with its law enforcement partners to share information and locate these individuals to effect the removal order. In July 2011, the agency launched its Most Wanted pilot, in which we asked the public for assistance in locating certain individuals. This has been quite successful, resulting in over 20 apprehensions, 13 removals from 245 tip calls on cases where our traditional investigation efforts had not produced a result. With the coming into force of the Balanced Refugee Reform Act, the agency will play a key role in enhancing the integrity and efficiency of Canada's reformed refugee system. The agency will launch an assisted voluntary returns pilot program to increase the level of voluntary departures of failed refugee claimants, as well as to make changes to tools, policies, regulations, and procedures to support expedited processing of failed refugee claimants. This will also mean increased resources for criminal investigations in the agency, thus improving the overseas interdictions and facilitate removals of persons seeking to defraud the refugee process. Despite of all this good work, however, there are challenges we face in ensuring the security of the immigration system. To address them, the agency has been pursuing opportunities to push the borders out through advanced information gathering and risk assessment. These efforts also support the agency's priorities of facilitating and expediting legitimate travel for low-risk passengers. One priority going forward is to increase access to biometric data to improve immigration and border determinations, establish and verify the identities of travelers, and conduct security screening at the earliest possible opportunity. From a security perspective, biometrics is an important identification technology and one that the agency already employs in its Nexus program. As my colleague, Madame Deschênes, has said, the Electronic Travel Authorization Initiative will allow Canada to screen each applicant against a number of databases and to conduct a risk assessment prior to purchasing a ticket to Canada. Approval under both CIC and the agency assessment processes would be required before an electronic travel authorization is granted. The agency also has an interactive advanced passenger information initiative underway that will require air carriers to provide data to the agency prior to flight departure. Not only will this initiative allow the CBSA to verify the Electronic Travel Authority status for third country nationals, it will enable us to conduct an initial risk assessment on all passengers, including a check against lost and stolen passport databases. As well, deny boarding in advance of flight departure for reasons of admissibility status, health, and safety. Mrs. Deschênes has also noticed that the agency is the Government of Canada lead on establishing an entry and exit system between Canada and the U.S., whereby entry into one country would establish exit from the other, enabling us to close the loop on a visitor's travel history. When implemented, this system will assist us in identifying travelers who have willingly left the country and close warrants accordingly. Identify individuals who have potentially stayed longer than authorized and avoid the issuance of warrants for individuals who have overstayed or are subject to removal orders. Following the implementation of these initiatives, the agency expects to see significant improvements in the way that we screen individuals before they reach our shores. With full implementation of the electronic travel authorization and the integrated advanced passenger information, Canada will greatly reduce the number of inadmissible people that arrive at our ports of entry each year. In addition, a fully functioning entry-exit program will allow us to definitely identify overstays and breaches of residency conditions and requirements. Taken together, these future programs will ensure that Canada employs a modern, efficient, and effective border management approach that protects the safety of Canadians and facilitates legitimate travel while safeguarding the integrity of our immigration processes.
Today, my colleague and I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thank you for both of you for your presentations to the committee. That's a good start to get us working. We go in rounds. Here, the government on this side has the first round, and the opposition follow. They are 7-minute rounds for questions and answers. Monsieur Linkletter and Ms. Deschênes know all about that. Ms. James, you are first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to our two officials from Citizenship and Immigration and our new guest today. I think there might be some sort of a misconception in Canada that we're able to track every single individual that comes in and out of Canada or across our borders. Is that a true statement, or is it in fact that we're able to track every single individual that comes into Canada?
Do you want me to start? No, we don't. We don't have a system right now to track everybody who comes in or exits the country. Canada has no exit controls currently. One of the objectives with the Beyond the Border initiative is to put in place a entry-exit system whereby, with regards to the U.S., the entry of the U.S. would form the exit from Canada, and it would be based on an information exchange that we would be able to track people coming in and out of the country.
So currently at this moment, there's no possible way that we can track every single person that comes into Canada when they're leaving? Is that a true statement?
That's a correct statement.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. I know from my own, well, so far I was just elected on May the 2nd, but I've had lots of opportunities to speak with my constituents. I know that, people who come fraudulently into Canada is a big concern right across Canada. I have actually had calls to my office regarding that. And we've heard lots of cases, and I've heard, my constituents very concerned about people who are maybe deported from Canada, obtain a different identification, switch the names around, and then try and re-enter Canada. And I'm just wondering, with the current system that we have, I know that you're saying we don't track individuals in and out of Canada, all of them every time, but I'm just wondering, with the current system we have, how are we able to identify these individuals who are coming back into Canada, changing their names and fraudulently coming back in? Is it possible to be able to identify all of those, or do we have a serious problem here?
It's an interesting question, Mr. Chair, and in some limited circumstances, we are able to identify individuals who switch identities if, in fact, they make a claim for refugee status in Canada. We do and have been collecting for a number of years the biometrics of refugee claimants who do make claims. So if someone does make a claim, is found not to warrant protection, and is deported from Canada and comes back with a new identity, we're able to track that if once we take the biometric the second time.
Thank you very much. I was actually going to ask about the biometrics and how that actually works. I know that you touched on that, Ms. Deschênes, in your speech. I'm just curious to know if you can elaborate on the biometrics system, how that actually works. And I'm just wondering, certainly Canada is not the first to be able to forge ahead with this type of a system to help protect its citizens. I'm just wondering if you're able to provide a list to this committee, to the public, of those other countries that are currently using biometrics and the success that they've had.
Yeah. So we will provide you with a list of countries that are presently using biometrics. As I indicated in my opening remarks, Mr. Chair, we will be rolling out biometrics to a certain number of nationalities next year in 2013, which will mean that people who are coming as visitors or students or temporary workers will be asked to provide a biometrics before we finalize the processing of their case.
With regards to biometrics, is it just the fingerprint? We're not talking iris scan or anything like that?
It will be the fingerprint plus a live photograph taken at a visa application center, likely.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm pretty much sure that I know the answer to this, but I just want to clarify it. We have problems with our current system, obviously, tracking people in and out of Canada and being able to, deter or prevent people who are fraudulently coming here. Is it in your opinion that once we move to biometrics that it's going to improve the ability for Canada to stop people from coming to Canada before they actually get here? If you could just...
For us, biometrics will permit us to lock in the identity of someone with a lot more assurance than we presently have, which is now based on a name and date of birth and a citizenship. So once you provide a fingerprint that we can check against, then of course we think we will have enhanced our security and our border work.
And I just had one more question. I just wanted to ask Mr. Chair how much time I have left.
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I listened very intently to CBSA, your speech as well, and I was actually, to tell you the truth, I had no idea that we actually refused 54,000 persons per year, and I was looking at these numbers. 15,000 inadmissible persons are removed from Canada. That must be a huge cost to taxpayers having to manage that particular system. 1,800 of, it's right here, 1,800 of whom were removed on the basis of criminal or other security issues. My father was a police officer. Obviously, we all have certain reasons for wanting safety and security. But at the final end of the day, the main priority of any government is the safety and security of its citizens. And so when I see these incredible numbers and the cost that must be associated with it, I would think that first and foremost, security for moving to biometrics and so forth, but also the cost to taxpayers right now. Could you elaborate? Do you have any idea how much that costs? You said 409 inland enforcement officers are required to investigate, arrest, and remove. Any idea on the costs associated with that?
I can give you costs that are related to cost of removals, all right, which we have. The average cost of a removal to CBSA is about $1,500. However, a lot of the removals that are done just at a land border that would be just about $100. But then if we have an escorted removal where we need to have CBSA officers and sometimes medical attention, that can go up to $15,000, right? So that gives you an idea around how the cost of removal varies in the average of the cost of the removals.
And in your opinion, if we move to an improved system, obviously with biometrics and so forth, some of that's going to be prevented because, in fact, the people that we're trying to remove will not actually set foot on Canadian soil to begin with?
That's right.
Is that a correct statement? That's
a correct statement, because with the electronic travel approval, we will actually have the ability to decide if a citizen can proceed with purchasing a ticket, if I may say. Then after, if the visitor boards the plane, is going to board the plane, we'll have another system whereby we'll inform the airline if we can actually inform the airline to board or not board that individual. So that will obviously allow us to prevent people from coming to Canada who normally right now can come to Canada, and thus end up being into the removal process if all the steps are followed that way.
Thank you, Ms. James. Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could pick up just on that last concept, the proposal to develop an electronic travel system, do I have that term right?
Travel authority.
If I understand that, that would allow you to prevent a person from purchasing a ticket and actually arriving in Canada where they would currently, and right now, they would come to a port of entry. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So is what you're saying that currently at the port of entry, where we have CBSA officials, that those people are slipping through now?
I think perhaps if I could, Mr. Davies, what we see now is that there are two broad approaches to managing access. The first is the visa, which CIC administers for a number of countries around the world, and that is our first contact with a visitor who plans to come to Canada. But as Mr. Sabourin was saying, the vast majority of visitors to Canada come from countries that are visa exempt, and so the first contact a Government of Canada official has with them is with the Border Services Officer at the port of entry. What the Electronic Travel Authority will do, and this is a system that Australia has used for a number of years, the United States has also successfully put in place, is that when you go to buy, when a traveler goes to buy a ticket, the information on that traveler is sent to the government, and the government would then run checks against databases that they have to determine whether or not.
My point, Mr. Linklater, if I may, is isn't that same check, that same information given at the port of entry now? Why is that check not being done now when they land at the CBSA officers
the idea
at the airport?
The idea with the ETA is to do that offshore, so that before the individuals actually get to a port of entry and then have access to Canada to make a refugee claim, they'd be all of this checking would be done as they buy their ticket, and as Mr. Sabourin says, if okay, allowed to proceed to.
No, I understand, Mr. Linklater, exactly what you're proposing. It's a question of you're doing the check before the person comes here. I want to just clarify that you're not worried that the person, when they come to our airport, is actually slipping through the CBSA officer's watch. Is the real concern to make sure they don't make a refugee claim, or is the concern that you want to do it offshore because you fear that if the person comes to the CBSA officer's wicket at an airport, that they're actually going to get through that?
No.
That's not the concern?
No.
So the real concern then is to prevent a refugee claim, is that right?
Just to add another layer of risk management here, when the planes leave foreign countries and are on their way to Canada, we currently have a system which is called Advanced Passenger Information, whereby we know who's in the plane, and that is checked for security reasons into a number of databases. And then if there's people that we want to interview more closely, the officer at the primary booth will know that, and the person will be referred to secondary where an interview occurs, right?
Right. So what is the
I just want to clarify that exists right now.
So thank you. So what is the advantage of the Electronic Travel Authority doing that before they ever get in the plane?
Because right now the information that we get what we call at wheels up, which is they're already in the plane on their way to Canada. Yeah. With the ETA system, we will have the ability to inform the airline before the flight has left to not board that passenger. And
what's the advantage to Canada?
There are security advantages, which is people who would be deemed inadmissible would not be coming to the country. And there are advantages also from a refugee perspective, which is we will get less refugee claims.
Okay. Now, you talked about the entrance-exit system, and I think you clarified, Mr. Sabourin, that the exit controls you're talking about really are to the United States. We're going to use, by sharing information with the United States, it's when a person in Canada exits to go to the United States, that because the U.S. will share that information with us, we will know that the person has left Canada, correct?
That's correct.
What about people in our country who are exiting Canada to countries other than the United States? Will we know that they've left Canada?
No.
In terms
Maybe
of...
I can just clarify on that point. As we look at the broader, longer-term approach for entry and exit information systems.
Don, maybe just one. You have to press the button.
Sorry, it seems, is there a difference of opinion here?
No,
I heard you say yes, Claudette.
our first priority is, as Mr. Sabran says, to share information with the United States at the land border. But the way we're developing the system is to allow for the eventual expansion to the air mode, which would then cover the scenario that you've described over time as resources become available and as the system is tested.
Okay, so that's a long-term view, but right now, the people that are leaving at an airport to go to a country other than the United States, we don't know that they've left Canada.
That will be the case for a period of time as we look at the longer-term vision implementation.
I know that there's CBSA operates 3 detention centers right now, I believe, Vancouver, Montreal, and Greater Toronto Area. And a detention center was specifically built for individuals suspected of terrorist activities and detained under security certificates in Kingston. Is that right? How many cells are in that detention center in Kingston, and how many detainees are in it right now?
That detention center is being closed, subject to a Government of Canada strategic review decision. It had capacity for 5 cells, but it is in a stage where it's virtually not being used at all, and it will be closed officially very soon if it hasn't already been closed.
There's nobody in it right now, I take it?
It hasn't been used for quite some time.
Okay. Do you know the cost of building and operating that detention center?
I don't have those figures. I could get those
for
you.
Could we have those provided?
Sure.
Now, I know that we
You
all...
can send those to the clerk, Mr. Hill, please.
We know that IRPA, the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, indicates that as a matter of principle, children should only be detained as a last resort. I don't think anybody in this room ever wants to see children detained. But I'd like to know how many children were in detention in the last year that we kept records. I don't know if that's 2010 or 2011. Does anybody know?
Yes, I do have some statistics. Yeah.
In 2000 for fiscal year 2010-11, we had 227 minors that were detained. 196 were accompanied, 31 were unaccompanied, and the average detention was 6 days.
For time.
I just want to make clear that we always take the interests of the children. We do as much as possible to keep the families together as much as we can, and children are kept in the detention center. There's men and women are separated, and the children are kept with their mothers.
Thank you. Mr. Lamoureux has up to 5 minutes.
I have a few areas I was hoping to be able to touch base on. First, in regards to the tracking issue, countries where there's a visa that's required in order to come to Canada, it's fair to say that there is no tracking once they depart Canada to indicate that they've actually left Canada. Just to be very clear, there is no country today where we issue a visa that once they arrive, there is nothing that we have that says they've actually departed, if I can just get that confirmed.
Okay. Yeah, I will confirm that in Canada, at the present time, there's nothing confirming someone has left the country.
Okay.
However, I just would add that sometimes when we issue a visa overseas, we will ask for the person to come back and tell us that they've returned, because we've made a risk management decision, and we want to sort of confirm that that risk management decision is the good one.
But that would be something completely at random. There is no directive coming from the ministry, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. In regards to citizenship, citizenship is something that we all obviously value greatly. We've revoking somewhere close to over 2,000 citizenships. Is it safe to say that all of the citizenships that have been revoked in the last year or so have been revoked strictly based on not qualifying for a number of days of residence in Canada in a set period of time?
Okay, so the statistics I quoted in the speech are about we're actively working on revocation. That is not all that have been revoked. There are fewer that have actually gone through the process. And I would not say that all of them are based simply on not having met the number of days.
What percentage?
I don't know that. I'd have to check that.
What would be other examples where you would revoke a citizenship?
They could have lied on their application form to say that they had no criminal charges against them or had never been criminally convicted of anything. And so that would be a reason for going back and going after their citizenship.
Are there any cases where misrepresentation, for example, of an applicant saying that when they came to Canada that in fact they didn't have a child, but as 4 or 5 years later they find out that there was a child, would you revoke a Canadian citizenship for that?
I don't know that we would have, and I doubt that we would have. So I'd have to go back and come back to the
Okay, if you would look into that specific one. Another specific example I would give is where you have a situation where someone says that they come to Canada and they were single. They come to Canada and then they find out years later, well, technically they were living common law by our standards, so they technically would have misrepresented themselves. Again, has any citizenship been taken away from an example of that nature, or someone that had misrepresented themselves, even if in fact they might have been married? I don't know if you know the answer to that offhand.
We will have to check that. Certainly from an immigration perspective, if they were simply permanent residents, we might look at that.
Okay.
But not, I will get back to the clerk on the citizenship issue.
Then in another report you say that there was 54,000 inadmissible persons at ports of entry. Is that 95% from the U.S., people coming to the U.S. borders, or where is that 54,000 inadmissibles coming from?
I'd have to get back to you on the country distribution of where they are. These are people who showed up at the ports of entry and were deemed inadmissible and were asked to be returned.
Yeah,
right.
Because I would just think there would be a huge difference. About 54,000, 90% of them are coming from the U.S., if you follow what I mean. So I think it would be beneficial just to get a bit of a breakdown as to where these people are coming from that are inadmissible. Then you indicate that you've removed 1,800?
15,000.
15,000 people. Typically when you're removing, are these from deportation orders that are sent in part? Or on what grounds would you be searching to remove?
Yeah, close to 90% are failed refugee claimants.
So they've gone through the process. They're told they have to leave the country, and now you're in search of finding those individuals. You find them, then you deport them, type of thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Most of them are compliant.
Yeah. On average, how long would someone of that nature have been in Canada before you're asking them to leave? Like if there is such thing as an average on that.
Well, do you want to take that?
We do know, given the availability of appeals and backlogs at the IRB, et cetera, that some failed refugee claimants can be in the country for as long as 4 to 5 years.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Lung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions have to deal with the application of biometrics. How do we share this information with other countries, and how do we protect or comply to the Privacy Act? Because if we don't share the information with other countries don't share with us, then really it's not an effective tool to determine who is admissible, who is not admissible. But if we do share it, then we're in a situation whereby there may be privacy issues, especially with some of the countries that may not have the best privacy protection or human rights records.
Okay. Well, we do, as we look at developing projects like the biometrics project, work very closely with the Privacy Commissioner. Most of these types of initiatives do require a privacy impact analysis to be done by the department that is then assessed by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So as we develop the policy frameworks, Mr. Chair, we are conscious of being compliant with our obligations under Canadian privacy legislation. In terms of sharing information with other countries, we have a very good relationship with what we call our five-country conference, which would include the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and now New Zealand. And we have developed some protocols that do allow us to share biometric information now through a shared server that Australia hosts, mostly tombstone biographic information that is then shared and pooled, against which individual countries can verify individual cases. If there is any adverse information on a case-by-case basis in conformity with our privacy legislation, we are given access to any adverse information beyond the tombstone that would then help us with matching our decision making.
At the risk of profiling, there will be some countries that may have a higher incidence of potential, I guess, criminal elements or people that we would find inadmissible. How will we use this as a tool to effectively, control that? I mean, what you mentioned are the 5 countries that are essentially, Commonwealth-based English Western democracies. Now, how do we move beyond that and say and look at some other countries that may have criminal elements that we have to deal with?
Okay. So as we launch the biometrics project, the fingerprints that we take will be stored and kept with the RCMP, who will have access to criminal information from other countries according to their legislation, for example, Interpol and that type of thing. So we anticipate being able to get a lot of that information from that sharing.
Well, I'm thinking perhaps a country like China. We have experienced white-collar crime and a gentleman that took us 10 years to remove, cases well documented. I mean, how do we, how do we have a better tool to prevent these inadmissible persons from coming into Canada?
So I don't think biometrics is going to be the solution to every problem. I mean, I don't think we can do that. But part of our work is to, first of all, lock in the identity of people early, and then to know who we're dealing with. Then, of course, there's all the work that we do from a risk profiling perspective in terms of identifying issues, for example, like where do people get their money and what are the issues around that. So in the case of white collar, obviously, if nothing has been publicized about an individual, we're likely with an advanced passenger information interactive, be able to maybe have more information, but it's not foolproof. I mean, that's, I think that would be too much to ask.
To the best of my knowledge, there's, at least I know of, is the following biometrics that we can do. Fingerprint, the digital image of a facial feature, and the last one is a DNA. Is this something that we will be using all 3 of these, or are we just limiting ourselves to fingerprint? Because with the fingerprint, it is easy to cosmetically, or with a good dermatologist, remove the fingerprint.
So our plan is to use fingerprints and a live photograph that we will have, which will permit the officers at the port of entry to also compare. We are not planning to do anything else at this moment, but I think like anything else, we will also be looking at what other countries are developing. But I think for us, fingerprint is one with historically has demonstrated its usefulness, so that's where we will be focused on.
And with the amount of information that is being stored with biometrics, what do you estimate the cost of this per individual to store this information for his lifetime? Let's arbitrarily, if we know when he was born, for say 99 years, what would be the cost of storing this information?
I don't know how much that would cost because that's not the plan. We're not going to keep it for 99 years. But do you know how much money?
No, I don't.
No. So we could get back in terms of how much money to do this first roll.
The reason I'm asking this is that we're probably entering an era where the database will be so tremendously large that it's something that has to do with privacy issue, having something to do with archives, and having to do with the cost of securing our borders. And I just want to have a handle on and that's the reason for my question. Right. That's how much more time have Mr. Chair?
I think you've had it.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm going to ask a question. Sorry. My question is the percentage of applications that are denied for security reasons.
The percentage of visa applications? I believe we get about 1.7 million visas. I'll let CIC answer that. But we receive, from an admissibility perspective in CBSA, we receive about 76,000 roughly security screening requests from visa officers abroad. And last year we gave 650 approximately recommendations in terms of security screening of not letting these people into the country. So it's a very, very small number of individuals versus the total number of people who get visas, and it's an even smaller number versus the 93 million that come into the country.
Mrs. Sitzabisen.
Thank you. Madame Deschênes, you mentioned earlier, I think in a response, that by 2013 we'll be introducing biometric requirements to certain nationalities. Can you expand a little bit as to which nationalities that are going to have biometric requirements before the others and how you identify those nationalities?
I can't give you too much precision on that yet. We're still in the planning stage for the biometrics project, but we know that to roll out a project like this and to go, and I would call it a big bang, to try to do everybody at the same time doesn't necessarily work very well. We've got experience with the global case management where we tried to do too much and then it took a little longer. So from an operational perspective, we're hoping to sort of target a few places, test the model, and then go from there.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So for me, I'm a new member of Parliament, and since becoming an MP, many of my constituents come into my office looking for help with visitor visa applications. Particularly in my riding, I have constituents who are applying to the Colombo visa office, and we know that the Colombo visa office has an extremely high rate of refusal. So people are confused about their rejection because they have a good job, they have family back home, they've traveled here to Canada before in many cases, and yet they're denied. And then the refusal letter that they actually get is very vague and unclear as to why they're denied. So can you explain why this might be happening and what I can actually tell my constituents?
Okay. Well, having served in Colombo, I can say that I didn't see too many cases that fit that profile that actually were refused, but I'll take your point that that's happening. That's right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, people get refused visitor visas on the fact that we are concerned about the bona fides of the application. It could be for security, criminality, or it could be simply that we're concerned that if they come to Canada, they will not leave Canada, and for that reason, they are refused. But that's the major reason.
So I guess proving that they have family or job back home and property back home and that they've successfully come to Canada, US or UK and returned, those aren't good enough anymore. I'm going to...
Cases like that?
I have many cases like that.
I'd be glad to hear about them.
I have many cases like that. So we'll talk about that later, I guess. I know that... the final decision for visas rest with the visa officers abroad. So if we are having visas granted by the visa officers for cases of people who are actually inadmissible and not being granted for people like the many examples that I just talked about right now, then what are we doing about the accountability of our visa officers abroad? Because we do know that some of them are contracted out and not actually Canadians.
Yes, we have locally engaged decision makers, and I think we look very closely at the work that they do and the quality of the work that they do. Certainly one of the mechanisms that we always look at is the issue of cases that go to court where the decision is overturned, which I would say is the minority of cases.
Right.
But certainly with global case management, we believe we'll be even better, more able to integrate our view of the performance and look at the decisions that are taken.
Okay. So when the decisions are made by the visa officers, who actually reviews the decisions that are made by a specific officer or a visa center?
Okay. So nobody specifically reviews every case that's done. We just that wouldn't necessarily, but certainly there's a quality assurance work that is done, which is looking, and we're strengthening our model to ensure that we can look at cases that are accepted and refused and make sure that we're comfortable. Now, we won't do all of them, but we'll do them in a systematic and sort of a statistical viable way.
Sure.
And certainly we have a case management branch at headquarters that really deals with the exception or making sure that cases that have gone off the rail are dealt with. So we have mechanisms to look at that.
Sure.
Thank you.
I guess
Thank you, Mr. Meningakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for joining us today, Mr. Linklater and Madame Deschênes. Thank you to our new guests for being here with us and for your presentations. I found them very informative. I want to talk a little bit about the fingerprinting and the biometrics. First of all, let me ask a question. Perhaps it's silly, but I'll ask it anyhow. What is the difference between a fingerprint and biometrics, since we're going to be fingerprinting and biometrics? Is there a different way that we fingerprint when it's biometric than fingerprinting if it's not a biometric?
No, but right now the system when we do fingerprint is very much paper-based, and so this new system will permit us to exchange these things electronically with the RCMP very, very quickly.
I see. So right now, which foreign nationals do you fingerprint?
We only fingerprint, we fingerprint all refugee claimants in Canada.
Okay. Now, with the biometrics, we're adding the picture, and we're going to be doing the fingerprinting using the biometric method. And how will this help keep anyone, I mean, how will we know from the fingerprint who is inadmissible to Canada?
So in part it will be with the support of the RCMP, who will be able to check through their databases what they have. It will also permit us to identify not only criminals, but of course people who may have another name that they have used in the past. So we're going to start being able to identify where people have used different aliases to get into Canada.
I see. Now, you mentioned sharing info with the U.S. at some point. That's one country. How about sharing info with other countries? Is there something in the works for that?
So as Mr. Linklater spoke, we are sharing already with our like-minded 5 countries. So.
But I think the key really is that in terms of getting any adverse information on our client base, it's really the work that the RCMP does with their databases linked to a number of countries where they will be able to provide us with additional information that we don't necessarily get now for decision making.
In order for that to be effective, certainly we get, I mean, last year we had 43 million hits on the website for people who don't want to come to Canada alone. I mean, you know, we allowed in 265,000 people. It's not just 4 or 5 countries that they're coming from. Which 4 or 5 countries do we do that with now?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Well, you mentioned maybe Madame Deschênes can.
Yeah. So we exchange presently on a pilot basis with the United States, Australia, UK, and New Zealand.
Okay.
But again, the issue is the fingerprints that we will take, we will send to the RCMP, and the RCMP has many other countries they exchange, for example, criminal information with. So we're already going to have more base of information available to us.
Okay. I represent one of the most diverse ridings in the country, and all the countries you mentioned are a very small minority of the diverse community in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And the concern is, obviously, in some of those countries where we get a lot of immigrants from, I don't know that they have the kind of sophistication to be able to share information with us, and perhaps there's a security risk there. Would you care to elaborate on that?
So one of the other things, of course, that's happening around the world is e-passports, which some countries will also have biometrics in them. So in the longer term, again, we're starting small and going to build on it. So that will permit us. On the comment about people in your writing and so on, I guess I would comment that some of the information we share with the Australians in the US and the UK are exactly about nationals from these other countries that have been either refugee claimants in another country or have committed crimes in another country. For us, it's criminals, it's security, it's about double or triple identities. It's all of those things that we're trying to do with biometrics. And so it's going to be an incremental work, I think.
In terms of information that is available today, I wonder what criteria is used to question somebody when they want to come back to Canada. For example, I have one community within my riding that seems to have a very high percentage of Canadians that want to come back. You know, they go abroad and they want to come back, and there's a detention time at the airport. It takes them a few hours to get through, whereas their co-citizens just come right through.
I think Mr. Sabourin talked about the liaison officers who do both interdiction but also facilitate Canadian citizens coming back.
Our officers abroad, or in 49 countries, they're involved with a number of activities. Some of it is facilitation, which is really Canadians, for example, who are in countries where we're having to return lots of Canadians, or Canadians who have lost their passports, and we facilitate their return back to Canada. The example is North Africa, for example, last year in terms of returning large amounts of Canadians back home. There's also involved on an operational basis. They're very often at the airport, and they are interdicting people that are improperly documented in order for them to not be coming to Canada. So from that role, that's an additional layer of security for the country.
Mr. Weston, you have 4 minutes. He took your minute.
I stop.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux remercier nos invités. Je pense que c'est très...
Thank you, and I thank our guests. This is most interesting because the values of which we are alluding to are values with respect to equality, justice, values that interest all Canadians at this point in our lives. We have before us the CBSA and Canada Immigration. Which agencies are appropriate but that are not here today, and who look after safety? For example, in the whole ambit of security, there's the RCMP and CSIS. I believe they're going to be here on Thursday, so you'll be able to meet with them then. But those are our two key partners with respect to security. We have agreements with them, and we work in close cooperation with them. We spoke a lot about the advantages to working with partner countries like the U.S. and the United Kingdom. We did not discuss Mexico, which is also a country in part of North America. Is there any exclusion for Mexico? How is it? What is our relationship with Mexico?
Our interaction with partner countries. We have a traditional, I say, association alliance with like-minded countries like the United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, which really are trusted partners, where we do have a lot of cooperation and collaboration overseas. Ce qui est trait au Mexique, le fait qu'il y ait un visa.
With respect to Mexico, the fact that there is visa, is this an impediment in sharing information with our colleagues? But having said this, we have a working group that was set up following this visa being compulsory, and I co-chair this with my Mexican counterpart, where we deal with issues of visas between both countries, and we discuss how we can improve the relationship. And visa services in Mexico in the field, with bundles to improve services to the customers, or we discuss how we can improve the partnership between Canada and Mexico in all matters of visas. Thank you. I found the interesting my colleague's questions most interesting, because she has been asking questions. What are we doing on a day-to-day basis in our offices? What do you feel is the most useful task that we could do as parliamentarians? And which part of this work is most worrisome and does not bring us to safeguarding our security? Is this a clear question to you?
As MPs. So where do you find that helpful and where do you find that very unhelpful in terms of promoting security interests for Canada?
Want to try?
Well, I think, as Madame Deschênes was saying earlier, where you as parliamentarians are seeing particular types of cases or trends that you find questionable or where you require clarification, to be able to identify that and bring that to senior management attention here in Ottawa to help us deal with the quality assurance issues that you perceive. I think that certainly as we move to more simplified processes and more of an e-environment with forms that are available online, that is going to help with client service as well. That should, we hope, take some of the work out of your offices to allow you to focus on other important constituency work. But I think the initiatives that we're discussing today, like biometrics and ETA, will be helpful for us to help secure identity and to make faster decisions that are going to be much more helpful to the public as they understand what they need to do more clearly as opposed to a paper-based system.
Thank you. Madame Grégoire.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bienvenue à...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all of you. My question is going to be deal with detention issues. You mentioned, firstly, that articles have appeared with respect to detention conditions in some of the institutions in Laval. On this topic, I'd like to hear you clarify certain things with respect to perhaps, well, we have statistics and we have procedures that provide for a 15-day detention. How do you justify then such aberrations as an individual who has to spend 3 months in detention conditions before his identity is checked? Why is there that extension on detention times, and how do you discuss this with us? Well, the average detention is about 25 days. For the 8,500 or the approximately 9,000 that were detained last year. Well, listen, it's more than a third is less than 48 hours. I can't confirm the statistic, but it's something like that as a detention time. Very short in many cases. The majority of those detained are individuals who are waiting to be deported in a given day. In a given day, there's about 500 people detained, 300 that have been mentioned previously in Laval, Toronto, and in Vancouver, and there's about 200 that are in provincial prisons because they have to be incarcerated because they're deemed to be a security to the Canadian public. There are other detainees as a result of our agents having detained them. If we have someone, for example, to be deported from the country, legislation provides for the fact that that individual must be deported as quickly as possible, as practically possible. But there might be impediments to this deportation. We might have difficulty obtaining the documents from an individual, and therefore the country is not cooperating with us. But as you know, that people who are being detained are entitled, as soon as they are detained, after a 48-hour period, the Refugee Commission decides whether or not they are to be maintained detained, whereby there's a quasi-judicial procedure for the Refugee Commission to decide, and then it's 777, 30 days. So all the individuals that have been mentioned, that have been detained for longer periods of time, have to go through a process whereby the Commission has decided that they must continue to be detained. Thank you. So, which, of course, all explains the extension of the time frame. Yes.
Said. Under the IRPA, the CBSA is permitted to detain individuals for 3 reasons. One is where there's a question of identity, where there's concern about a danger to the public, and whether there may be a concern about flight risk that the individual will fail to show for a hearing. I can also tell you that the agency has a strong quality assurance program that involves access by the Canadian Council of Refugees and representatives in Canada from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees who come into our detention centres to monitor, to ensure that Canada is complying with international norms and also respecting our domestic legislation. So these are some of the factors that help the agency manage the detention population on an ongoing basis.
Ok, j'aurais une autre question.
Very good, thank you. I have another question. I was informed of psychological distress conditions, very deep, serious conditions of individuals that are at the Laval institution. I'd like to know whether or not, if on that topic you have any statistics or figures that you might be able to share with the committee pertaining to the magnitude of mental health of individuals that are being detained in those centers, and are there things that can be done, and if so, what are they?
So we can provide you with some data that reflects the issues that you've raised. I can tell you that in partnership with Citizenship and Immigration Canada, under arrangements, there is health services provided to ensure that detainees have proper medical attention, which includes physicians and psychological assistance. We do, for sure, have challenging detainees, and so we monitor this quite closely. And in cases where our detainees are held in a provincial facility, we also rely on their expertise to provide the kind of mental support and health services that are appropriate to the cases.
Thank you. Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here and for the presentation. We talked a fair bit about fingerprinting and biometrics and stuff, and my question is related to fingerprinting. We hear about cases all the time in media where an individual has been deported, be a refugee claimant or whoever, and then they're able to enter the country back using whatever means. How is this possible? Can you explain a bit about that?
People can misrepresent their identity. People can fraud their identity. People can enter the country between ports illegally. So there are a number of means by which people can come back, either by frauding their documents, changing their identity, or entering without us knowing about it.
So once the department does become aware of these cases where an individual was clearly, say, deported in the past and managed to get back in the country, can you tell us what sort of steps are taken to remove them back out of the country, or to get them out of the country?
If we identify them, the removal process follows a standard removal process that we have for every person, which is that they would be arrested, they would be put in detention if they're a flight risk or if they're a danger to the public. We would need to have travel documents, so we would need to contact the country to obtain travel authority. They would have a 48-hour detention review, then a 7-day detention review, 30-day detention review. They are allowed a pre-removal risk assessment, which is done by my colleagues at CIC, which you may talk about, which determines if there's a risk to their life or if there's a risk of torture of them returning to the country. And only after all those steps are done, including possible appeals, could we then remove them to the country, the country where they're from.
So are you saying that they would go through all of those steps again for the second time? I mean, would you not have gone through those steps when we removed them out of the country the first time?
Technically, they would, once they come back, they would still be able to go through all of those steps. That's correct. Now, of course, we're very good at removing people who want to be removed. So if anybody gets caught and says, yes, we're going, they're going to be removed real quick, I can promise you that. But most of them will seek to avail themselves of every opportunity to remain.
That's great.
Of people who've come back to the country many times and then have gone through this process a number of times.
Would you also be able to tell us, say, for each of the last 5 years, how many people have been found inadmissible to Canada before or at their entry to the country? Would you have those numbers?
The 54,000 I gave you earlier, that's for the total people who've presented themselves at the border and have been deemed inadmissible and have been returned.
And what sort of time period does that 54,000?
It's last year. Just last year.
Just 1 year.
I can get you numbers for previous years if you want, but that number's for last year.
Okay.
So there's another percentage that have been found inadmissible to get a visa or for immigration to Canada from overseas. So that would be the total population that was refused, but not necessarily in the case of our refusals overseas would it necessarily tied to being a criminal or security. It could be for other reasons. But we could probably work to make sure that the clerk gets a breakdown.
Sure. Would you be able to give us an idea as to whether this 54,000 number, how much does that vary year to year, or is it sort of a...
I don't have that.
Don't have that number. Okay.
Yeah.
Be quick. You got about 10 seconds.
I'm done, I guess.
You are done. Okay. Mr. Dijkstra.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question through to you, Peter. You mentioned the issue surrounding the inspections and the reviews that take place in our detention facilities. Could you expand on that a little bit in terms of who are actually the groups or individuals that go in to do the viewings or at least to observe who they are and what kind of reports you've had over the last while in terms of the work that you are doing?
Yes, thank you for that. There are two groups. It's the Canadian Council of Refugees, and the second group is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And with respect to the Canadian Council of Refugees, under a Memorandum of Understanding, they perform a monitoring function in the immigration holding centers that CBSA administers, and so they do a series of checks and they give us annual reports. I can tell you that on balance, their reports are favorable, and their recommendations that we receive to make improvements are seriously considered. They form part of discussions with the CCR on a regular basis, and we integrate the recommendations wherever we can into our overall program strategy for improvements. With respect to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we have regular meetings with the senior representative in Canada, and likewise with our partners at Foreign Affairs and CIC and CETA. They too have access to persons in detention and are able to report to us their observations, which are always insightful and very helpful for the CBSA in maintaining adherence to international detention standards and upholding our domestic laws. The relationship with both groups is very valuable, healthy, and continues to be a priority for the agency.
how was the determination made to use those two organizations as the filter, if you will, or the partners that you use to engage in this process?
I can say that with respect to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that is their mandate, and Canada is a signatory to conventions that facilitate and permit their access to our facilities. I have to admit that with the CCR, the arrangement goes back many years, so I'm not entirely sure of the origins, other than they do offer their services as an independent group to government, and this is an area where they have some expertise. So that's been leveraged over the years.
I wouldn't mind exploring that a little bit more. Not right now, I don't have a lot of time, but I would love to get some further information on how that relationship was determined to be implemented and how it came to fruition. And secondly, I don't know how we would be able to do this, but I think it'd be very helpful to this committee if we were able to get 2 or 3 of those reports, recent reports that either one of those organizations has done for you. If we need to do that in camera, we need to do that in confidence. We have no problem with that, but I think it would be extremely helpful for those on this committee to have a clear understanding of what the responsibilities that those two groups have with respect to the relationship and the work that they do.
I would be happy to. Mr. Chair, I would just like to correct. I inadvertently referred to the Canadian Council for Refugees. I was thinking the Canadian Red Cross. The Canadian Council for Refugees, we have a relationship with them, but it's the Canadian Red Cross that provides the monitoring function in our IHCs, and I'll be happy to provide you further information.
They're both our words.
My apologies for the misspoke.
Clear, the point still stands, but I appreciate the clarification. You mentioned a relationship with the CCR. What would that be?
The CCR is an advocacy group on behalf of refugees, and so they bring to our attention a range of matters, including cases that they feel deserve review. They also engage us in a dialogue on the overall system, and so we attend their annual conferences. They're a partner in many of our discussions on how to improve the immigration system.
When you have conversations with them, what's the type of detail that they provide you in terms of advice? Is it focused on the assistance for refugees, or is it focused on the overall model or principle that you operate under?
I would say it's both. They do bring cases to our attention, but they also provide advice and commentary and observations based on the overall immigration and refugee system and our practices, how we discharge our mandate. So it's the full range.
Thank you. You're next. Thank you.
I have some sort of doubt. You say there's a request for being a refugee, but there's also stated that the U.S. that this doesn't apply to a U.S. citizenship. So if they come, they have to have a passport, no problem, because they're coming from the U.S. Because you've targeted certain countries. What about the biometrics, and what is the recognition you give to fingerprinting or to biometrics, and what is the percentage of individuals coming to Canada whose identity hasn't really been deemed to be a true identity? Do you have any statistic on that? I don't know whether or not we have percentages or data. I think I'll take your 3 questions under advisement, and I'll see what exactly we can give you as an answer on them. There's an awful lot of work that was done as to why we're proceeding in that way, so probably we have the data, but I don't have it with me. There's something else that worries me. I might give you additional information, in part at least, on the 93 million approximate individuals who come back to Canada or to come to Canada. 75 million are checked as to identity when they arrive on our borders, because we have a system whereby we can take their passport and check the identity of the individual, but that's done at the entry port. But there are a few million for whom we have no system where we can validate the identity. Out of the 93 million that come, 75 million go through a first level. Yes, because if I understood it correctly, the system will only apply to some countries, not to everybody. Something else. This test is done before coming to Canada, but if the individual comes from a country in a political crisis situation, there's no method of going through all these tests. What happens? Who will look after seeing to it that these biometric tests are passed? Because all this is done before they come to the port of entry. But if in the country of origin there's no way of doing it, will there be machines installed? Will it be the private sector looking after it? Well, then there's danger with the information. The manner in which we have elaborated this project is that the Canadian government will have the equipment, the machine in the countries to take the biometric data from the passengers. We will be using the application centers as a first priority, and the embassies will also have something. But in our case, we prefer that it be the visa centers. Yes, but this is a government. We're speaking about a private firm working for the embassies, because I know that in Venezuela this is the case. I was told that to analyze any files for visas from Venezuela, there were private companies who were working for the embassy. I find that very dangerous, because what happens about the information? Well, there will be organizations, private groups, that will have a contract with us, and we'll have a system in place. Yes, but what right do we have here in Canada to think that there are private companies that are going to take private information from Canada? I wouldn't like this to happen, I mean, as a Canadian, for me or my children. The project was prepared with a great deal of contacts with the Privacy Commissioner. The company will not have access as to keeping the biometric data of the customer. That will be sent directly through a system here in Canada. But it's true that the company... Well, now listen, I mean, this is awful. I find that extremely dangerous. Yes, some countries have already used the system. The French... we won't be the first ones using the system, but there's a lot of identity theft throughout the world. We're giving the information. Even amongst police forces, people have information and they have it and they sell it. It's very dangerous.
Some of those privacy questions can be asked of her. We have finished the first page, so we're going to start all over again. I'm going to ask one question first. I'd like you to tell me the difference between the security screening for temporary applications and permanent applications, permanent residency applications, if any.
Okay. There's the security screening for temporary residents, or for people that are coming here temporarily.
Yes.
And the security screening for people that are permanent residents,
yes,
or people that are coming in here permanently. We now have service standards, if I may say, in terms of on the temporary resident side. They're very, very different than they are on the permanent side. But I can elaborate more on those if you wish. But in the end, the security screening is to make an admissibility decision around very, very specific areas of the Act of IRPA. It's either we're looking if there's reasonable grounds to believe if the individual that's applying permanent or temporary, if there's suspicion of national security, such as espionage and terrorism, or criminality, or organized crime. And in one case, the process is much longer. It takes about 8 months right now.
Which one?
The permanent. Takes about 8 months. On the temporary side, just over the last few months, we finalized the service standards. For VIP or urgent request, it's 48 hours. For China, it's 5 days. For what we call Tier 1 countries, that includes Saudi Arabia, India, Haiti, Pakistan, there's another one missing, it's 10 days. And for the other countries, for Tier 2, it's 20 days.
Thank you. We have Mr. Gill and Ms. James. I don't know who's going first. Ms. James?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask some questions about, in 7 minutes, thank you, in general security threats and organizations or groups that may be deemed to be a security threat to Canada. I'm just wondering how many groups are actually in Canada are listed as a security threat. I don't know how many there are. Are there 5, 50, 500? How many groups, organizations are actually on that list?
I don't know how many are. I'd have to get back to you in terms of an answer.
Okay. Any rough idea?
No.
My generalities of 550. Okay.
But what I would make sure that people understand is, under the Immigration Act, it's not about organization having been listed as being inadmissible to Canada. We always look at the case by case. We look at what the person has done. So we always look at the situation. So we do not have a listing process for inadmissible organizations from an immigration perspective.
Okay.
Maybe if I could just add to that.
Sure.
There are regimes, though, at a specific point in time in a given country for which then that list does exist.
Okay, so let me, you're going to get back to us on the number of groups that where membership in a particular group might be deemed a security threat. Is that information actually available to the public, or is it something that I can look up personally, or is it something that can be presented to this committee, or is there an issue with public security to even disclose that list?
The list of regimes and at which point in time is, I don't have it with me, but that is public information.
Okay.
And it's something that I believe we can give you.
That's under the war crimes provision.
Thank you.
The inadmissibility.
Right.
And of course, we take most of our advice about security organizations from CSIS in terms of, and I would say that is a little bit more security.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering, with regards to these particular groups or organizations, what is the exact process for determining if someone is a member of those groups? I mean, is every person who is affiliated with a group, organization, or a member of a group or past member, are they automatically deemed inadmissible to Canada? Or is there some sort of a criteria or scrutiny that, a checklist perhaps? And if there is such a thing, is it something that is available to us as a committee? Can you disclose that information?
Every case that is referred to us by visa officers abroad is really taken on a case-by-case basis. Of the 76,000 that we've received last year, I believe it's about 50,000, it's about 70,000 that get referred to CSIS. And then they give us their assessment. So, and if that's for national security reasons. So the vast majority are referred to CSIS, and then CSIS has their processes whereby they give us an answer.
So do you know if the particular criteria that CSIS uses to determine someone's inadmissibility to Canada, is that something that is available to us to examine, or can you provide that criteria?
You're better to ask that to CSIS.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just say that, just to be very clear, CVSA and CSIS give advice to CIC in terms of the final decision. And so when we make a decision about inadmissibility, it's weighing possibly the security or criminality or aspects with other aspects of the legislation, because every legislation has a provision for you could be inadmissible, but we can overcome it with the tools in the process.
Okay, I just want to kind of summarize and make sure I have a definitive answer. So is it true that if you have a membership in an organization or a group that's deemed to be inadmissible as a whole, is it true that all members, whether you're affiliated with it, past member, or linked to it in some way, is it possible that some of those people will not be deemed inadmissible, or is it a given that everyone associated with that particular group would be inadmissible?
I would point you to sections 34 of IRPA in particular, which relates to admissibility and inadmissibility concerning security. But sections 34, 35, 36, and 37 relate to security, criminality, war crimes, and organized crime. And so that sets out the definition that we all are guided by in terms of determining admissibility or inadmissibility to Canada. And I can say that the court's interpretation of the term membership has been fairly broad.
Mr. Gill has 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Could I just ask one more question?
Sure, it's up to you
I
too.
apologize. I just wanted to go back to the issue of deportation, and I think that I heard that you said 90% of the people that are removed from Canada are actually failed refugee claimants. In that conversation, I heard I'm not sure who answered that question, someone actually said that it can take up to 4 to 5 years to actually have someone physically removed from Canada after they've failed the refugee status or their claim.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I also heard from someone else on this panel that deportation is done as quickly as possible. So I'm trying to understand whether as quickly as possible means 4 to 5 years, and why does it take that long?
I'll be happy to.
If I could just start, I'm looking at my numbers again, and I'm the one that quoted 90%. It's actually 73% last year. So if I could correct that number rather than, I was looking at another number, I apologize. IRPA is very clear that it says practically feasible as possible that we need to remove. There are many impediments that are possible in terms of removal. There's appeals process because the system is based on natural justice. There has to be an appeal process, and there can be many appeal processes. We need to have a country that is collaborative, that is going to, in many cases, we don't have any passports, we don't have any travel documents. We need to obtain travel documents. The person needs to also collaborate. The airline, we need to arrange it with the airline to make sure that the safety and security of the people on the airline. So there's a number of appeals, there's a number of steps, which makes that it can go very quickly if all lines up very well, or it can take very long if it doesn't.
Thank you. Mr. Davies has up to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Deschênes, I'm not sure I heard an answer to the question from my colleague. She asked you said that you've determined certain nationalities that you're going to roll out the biometrics plan first. Which nationalities are those?
I'm not in position to give you that yet because I don't think we've completely finalized that.
Which ones are you considering? Is there a reason you don't want to tell the committee what nationalities you're considering for the biometrics if you're going to roll them out?
Well, I think we're looking at criteria, which I think is what we're trying to do with biometrics, which would be involved with security, criminality, overstayers, that type of thing. But we haven't yet finalized that list.
Okay, so you did testify that you're going to roll this program out of biometrics on certain nationalities first. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes. We're not going to do all at once. We're not going to do a big bang because that's not normally a very successful way to
I understand you've already given that testimony, but you won't tell us what nationalities there are, but there are certain criteria. What criteria are you applying to determine which nationalities you will apply the biometrics program
looking at
to?
Operational feasibility. We're looking at criminality, security, overstays, that type of thing to look at from a risk perspective.
Okay. Can you tell this committee when you get that information which nationalities biometrics will be applied to first?
I'm sure we will be telling the committee as soon as we can.
Thank you.
I think that's fairly important. When can you tell us?
I think, Mr. Chair, the process will probably take us until early fall.
Thank you. Mr. Davies, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, in terms of legal entries, it seems like we're tightening up our security. Is that a fair comment to say that we're tightening up entry to Canada? Is that a fair characterization of the sum total of your testimony?
We're in the future with the introduction of biometrics, ETA, and interactive advanced passenger information, we are going to have a lot more information in order to know who could pose a security threat to the country than before. So if that's what you mean by tightening, the answer is yes.
Well, we're asking people for we're going to bring in a system where we get people's fingerprints. We're bringing in a system of electronic travel authority that, if I understand correctly, will apply to countries even presently who we don't require a visa from, that may prohibit people from even getting on a plane to come here.
I think is
that not tightening up security?
I think what the suite of initiatives we're looking at, Mr. Chair, will do is actually, on the one hand, provide a broader range of tools to help us with our security work, but at the same time, there's also the facilitation side. So with an ETA, for example, once we've tagged someone's identity and we've done the screening overseas, the experience at the port of entry is going to be much different for that individual because they'll have been pre-cleared before they even got on the airplane. So much like pre-clearance now for us going to the United States, we could see a time in the future with an ETA where individuals arriving at a port of entry might simply just walk out and pick up their bags at the baggage carousel.
So is the purpose of this to facilitate quicker entry into Canada for people visiting Canada?
In large part, but at the same time, we're looking at the broader suite of tools to address a population that right now we're only able to identify at the port of entry.
Okay, just give us some general idea on the committee. Has the problems of illegal entries gotten worse over the last, say, 10 years, or been the same, or do you have any numbers on this? Are there more illegal entries coming now to Canada than there were 10 years ago?
Use as a proxy the number of refugee claims. The numbers are certainly lower now than they have been in the last couple of years.
Lower refugee claims?
In terms of refugee claims, the numbers have gone down from previous years.
So that suggests that the problem of illegal entries is getting better by that measure?
By that measure, yes, but that's not the only measure.
Mr. Sabourin, you corrected yourself. The Canadian Red Cross, you said, does monitoring of people in detention. Are they paid to do that work? Do they get money from the federal government? Or maybe it was Mr. Hill, I'm not sure.
No, they're not paid to do that. They don't get paid by the CBSA to do that work.
So the people doing the monitoring of people in detention don't receive any assistance from the federal government to do that work? Is that right?
That's correct.
And UNHCR, I think I had that right. How often do they inspect detention facilities in Canada on an annual basis?
I would say it's frequently. It's systematic in the sense that that's their mandate, and we cooperate with them to allow them to access detention centers as they wish. And
so can you give me a general idea? Nothing to hold to, but ballpark. Are representatives of the UNHCR going into detention facilities once a month in Canada, once a year, once a week? Any idea?
Yeah, I have an idea. It's more once a month or more frequently than that.
Okay. I want to switch to something else, and that's what I consider to be an epidemic problem of visa rejections in many places in this country. I've got a sheet here that's got a list of the rejection rate, and there's at least 10 centers in this world that have rejection rates about 50% for people who want to come here to visit Canada or visit their families. And again, Ms. Deschênes, I can tell you that from my experience as an MP in Vancouver, and I have a very diverse riding as well, I can tell you for a fact that the problem of people getting turned down for visas when they own property, when they have family in India, when there is no risk factor for them to return, is epidemic. And I'm just wondering if you have any comment on that. That would be the thesis I put to you. And I've talked to other MPs. There seems to be problems this way. In fact, I would tell you, if you are a single Indian under the age of 30, male or female, and you don't own property, you're not getting a visa to come to Canada because they profile you by saying that you're not married, you don't own property, therefore they make an assumption, a stereotypical assumption that they won't return to India. And I get stories like that in my office weekly. Is there any comment on that?
Well, I guess I would comment that, it's difficult on the bona fides, right? We're measuring intent. And unfortunately, officers have to look at past practices when they come to intent. And so unfortunately, if a large number of people who fit that sort of characteristic have come and gotten visas and then stayed illegally, that makes it harder for people that are in the line. So it's not easy
That's it.
for officers. We monitor that.
Time's up. Thank you, Mr.
Continue on that theme, because technically we don't monitor to find out whether or not they are returning. I want to reinforce, because it is a huge issue, whether it's India, the Philippines, China. In fact, I had someone just over the weekend, very, very good friend, someone that I've known for a long time. He's married to someone of Chinese heritage. She's been trying to get her best friend to be able to come. Her best friend's got money. She's got a job. She just wants to come and experience Canada, see where her girlfriend now has is living, the environment in which she's living, and she's been rejected not once but now twice. And it is phenomenal in terms of the kickback that we're getting from embassies. It's not acceptable. The number of family rejections for people to be able to come for marriages, deaths in the families, birthdays, and so forth. I think that if you were to canvass any member of Parliament's office where there's a high number of first-generation immigrant population, you will find that that's the case. Anyway, I'm not going to ask about that. I do want to get clarification when you make the statement that force regulatory changes this year that would deter marriage fraud. Can you just quickly, and I say quickly, expand on exactly what you mean by that?
Sure. Late last spring, the department pre-published a notice of intent that flagged our intention to move forward with regulatory proposals to put in place conditional permanent residence status for new spousal applicants to ensure that those who are entering into relationships of convenience would be deterred from doing so. So conditional permanent residence status would mean that while they could live and work in Canada, if they were not deemed after a certain period, say 2 or 3 years, to be still in a legitimate relationship, with, of course, appropriate exemptions for cases
So
of
now, are we saying, Mr. Linklater, that that is in fact the policy now? So if you're from India and your wife comes down, she is now expected to maintain that residency and still stay married. Otherwise, after a short period of time, if she leaves and he calls immigration, she could be deported?
No, I mean, we would be looking at to determine whether or not the relationship was legitimate, as we do now at the outset before a visa is issued. But the idea would be with conditional permanent residence, which is something Australia and
That's right. But once she lands,
yes,
okay, so she's married, she's been processed, she lands in Canada. Can she be deported if, in fact, she chooses not to live or reside with that individual that she had married?
Theoretically, yes.
Now, and when did that take effect?
Well, we would be doing verifications after the period of temporary residence, and if it was found that the individuals were no longer in that relationship, we could conceivably take enforcement action.
But when did that take effect?
It's not in effect yet, no. The government has flagged an intention to move in that direction. There will be a regulatory package that would lay out the specifics of how it would.
So after living with a gentleman for 2 months, she's put into a compromised position. She better stay in that relationship or she could get deported.
No, we'll be looking at a policy framework, Mr. Chair, that will provide exemptions from the policy in cases of domestic abuse.
Okay. Do you have that framework available that we could actually see it?
Well, beyond the notice of intent, we can provide that to the committee through the clerk.
Okay. I would, I'm very much interested in that file. I heard about the intent that was expressed last year on it and was actually quite surprised. I think that you're putting a great deal you're potentially compromising a lot of people when you force them to stay within a relationship. And this applies for many countries, not just one country, especially in the way in which relationships are entered into nowadays through internet and so forth. So I just flagged that as a problem area that I have. Finally, if there's hopefully enough time, visiting visas that typically expire today, to what degree do we get deportations out of Canada where a visiting visa has actually expired, where you're asked to go and locate that visiting visa and deport the person?
I don't know that we know that, but I would say it's probably very close to zero. That's not where the energies of the CBSA enforcement officers are.
Right, because typically what I tell people is that, look, if your visa has expired, or at least a few weeks before your visa expires, you go and you apply for your extension, and as long as you got your little receipt saying you've applied for that extension, you're okay, you can continue to stay?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
So we want them to apply for an extension, but they have...
Okay. So then what happens...
No, I'm afraid,
okay.
because I want to ask a question too. I've had a number of cases where someone's had a visa a number of years ago and they apply again, months later, years later, and they don't get one. Is that a security issue, or is that too complicated a question to ask?
It's a complicated question to ask, because normally if someone has had a visa and has come to Canada and gone back, and they're still have a good job and own land and so on, they would normally get a visa.
Okay,
So,
I've just had a number that where they haven't, but I expect it is complicated. Mr. Menengatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions for you folks from CBSA here. Specifically to the Auditor General report. The Auditor General made several recommendations of the Department to improve security and health screening. Could you tell us what some of those recommendations were?
Sure. First of all, we agree with all the recommendations of the Auditor General, so I want to make that clear. But the Auditor General made recommendations in 4 areas. The first one is around helping visa officers abroad making admissibility decisions, giving them the right tools, making sure that the information that we give them, such as risk indicators about those specific countries, are up to date. The second area was through the security screening process. We worked very, very closely with our partners in CSIS and RCMP, and the Auditor General had a number of recommendations whereby we should ensure that all the information that is available in those 3 organizations be mapped out, so that we're sure that we're using the universe of information that's available in order to make proper decisions. The third area was around process, and this is around training of our officers, quality control, and service standards. So there were some recommendations around there. And the fourth area was around governance and performance measurement, whereby the Auditor General wanted to make sure that our agreements, our memorandums of understanding with the various organizations were up to date, that we were governing the process properly, and that we had proper performance measurements in place. In other words, we were getting proper feedback from visa officers that the system was working for them, that they had the right information, they were able to make proper admissibility decisions. And finally, that between our 2 organizations, between CIC and CBSA particularly, that we measure the performance of the overall system in terms of that we know we're meeting service standards and this sort of thing. We've agreed with all the recommendations. Most of the recommendations will be addressed this year. I could go into the detail in terms of
he found,
what we're doing.
I don't want to, because my time is limited here, he found that many of the recommendations have not been implemented. Can you tell us why it's taken so long?
The recommendations that were made to us in the last report, we've started working on them right away, and it'll take about a year before most of them are implemented.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit on update us at least on what actions you've taken?
Sure. I'll give you an example on service standards. I gave you the example of service standards, which didn't exist before and now exists around the VIP and urgent, China 5 days, and then Tier 1, Tier 2. We've made substantial progress also in terms of risk indicators, which around this helping visa officers abroad make an admissibility decision. We're updating the risk indicators that help visa officers determine if a case should be referred to CBSA or not. So those are in the process of being updated. Some, for example, for a country where we get many referrals, such as Saudi Arabia, that work is now completed. In terms of the 2 I can give you a last example. In terms of the 2 organizations working together, we've now elaborated what we call is a performance dashboard. And in that performance dashboard, which covers, in fact, all of the joint activities that we do with CIC, there's now something specific to security screening.
So we can expect to see all of these implemented within a year? Is that what
Yeah, most of them, some actually are already implemented, so the review of risk indicators should be done by the summer. Some of the reviews of the, for example, the MOUs with the security agencies, particularly RCMP, that goes to early 2013, but all the other deliverables are for 2012.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
You've got about 3 minutes.
Oh, good. You spoke about the large number of people that were found inadmissible for security reasons. Do you keep data? Can we get from you, perhaps to the clerk and the chair, a breakdown for the last 5 years by country? Is that possible to provide us?
Yeah,
That would be very useful.
I'll look into obtaining that. If I can just, again, I just want to contrast which is within the immigration process in terms of visa applicants coming from abroad. The number of refusals last year was 652. So it's very, very low. So that's, if you look at the 76,000 cases that were referred.
Yeah, I'm talking about for security reasons, right? The breakdown for security reasons by country for the last 5 years.
I'll see if.
So I would just note, though, that our systems before global case management didn't really track the reason for refusal. So we can probably look at advice we might have received, and I think the Auditor General talks about less than 1% of cases are refused for security reasons. So I'm not sure that we're going to be able to go very far. I think in the future we will be much better to be able to give you that data, but we'll look at what we have.
But not everybody who is flagged is refused. So
That's correct.
Is there that data? Could we have that for the last 5 years as well, by country? How many people are flagged by country and how many are refused by country?
Yeah, for the 652, if those are the ones.
Whatever the numbers are, you would know.
Okay,
Yeah.
if for the 652
yeah.
that we recommended to CIC that they make a decision of somebody who there's reasonable grounds to believe based on security that they're non-admissible, we have the breakdown by country. The number one country I can tell you is Russia, which is the number one country we give negative recommendations. That's different from the total number of people who've showed up at the border, and have we deemed are non-admissible. And that doesn't need to be that is for security reasons per se.
Yeah, I'm just asking for how many people were flagged and how many people were refused in the last 5 years by country.
Yeah.
So if you have that information, that would be
I'll
very helpful.
see if we can.
Am I running out of time?
30 seconds.
30 seconds? Thank you very much.
Very good. Madame Gregouet, I think you have the final word.
Okay. Donc je voudrais savoir.
I'd like to know, in 2008, the Auditor General's report realized that there was a lack of coherence as to decisions taken with respect to detention measures, where there was a real issue. And I'm wondering if that particular lack of coherence was settled or not.
Question. The Auditor General's report made a number of recommendations. Action plans have been developed for all of those recommendations. The agency agreed with all of the recommendations that the Auditor General made, and measures have been taken to address the concerns with respect to detention, as well as with removals. The agency has made significant progress tracking the removals program, establishing targets for the removals program. So yes, the answer is we have taken steps to address.
Okay, et donc suite à la...
And therefore, following the adoption of these recommendations, is there any mention made with respect to coherence? Indeed, was this able to be measured or not?
The Auditor General was making some observations about national consistency of the program, the detention program. And we've taken measures to address national consistency through updates to our policy manuals, to our procedures. But I also have to acknowledge that there is differences in our detention capacity across the country, and we are reliant in some provinces on the provinces to detain our population. So as a result of these limitations, there are variations, but I can assure you that national program consistency is a priority, and many steps have been taken to strengthen national consistency and coherency.
D'accord. Je voudrais juste avoir une confirmation. Donc vous...
Just confirmation, if I may. You spoke about a third with respect to time delays of 48 hours for detention. Could the committee have those figures in a detailed measure for each detention center?
Referring to the existing detention review cycle that falls under the mandate of the Immigration and Refugee Board. So detention decisions are made at 48 hours, 7 days, 30 days, and every 30 days thereafter. So if you're looking for statistics on detention decisions and decisions to release by the IRB on those timelines, I think we'll be able to put some information together for the committee.
For each detention center? That was her question.
For each detention center.
Okay, I think we've concluded. Sorry, sir, Mr. Hill?
Yeah, I will do what certainly we can within the limitations of our existing systems, information systems.
Okay. He says he's going to try, I think. Is that what you mean? Because we love to have that information. That's important information. And you've kind of qualified it.
Yes, we'll provide the information that our systems will allow us to generate, and we should be able to give you a breakdown that gives you a sense of detention release decisions across the various timelines.
Okay. You're going to give us information for each detention center. That's all I want to know.
Yes, be happy to do that, Chair.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. I think time's expired, and I'd like to thank our permanent representatives from the department for visiting with us once again, and Mr. Hill, Monsieur Sabarin from the Canada Border Service Agency. I thank you. Your presentations have been well received. Thank you kindly. This meeting is adjourned.